Holly Miller had been planning her trip to New York for a very long time. She was looking forward to the day when her dream would finally come true. The young woman lived in a small town in northern Iowa and had never before been in the world-famous metropolis. Therefore, after successfully completing a work project, Holly took the opportunity to go on the long-awaited trip. One of the reasons she so desperately wanted a change of scenery was because she had broken up with her boyfriend not so long ago. She took it badly and was in a lot of pain. Michael, her ex, grew up in a wealthy family and from an early age was accustomed to the luxury and wealth that his parents surrounded him with. Holly, on the contrary, could not boast of her mom having a six-figure income. The young woman's dad died in a car crash 10 years prior. Since then, Penelope Miller has been raising her daughter alone. In order to provide her with everything she needed, the woman had to work almost 7 days a week. Fortunately, Penelope had a great relationship with her daughter. Over time, Holly became her most important support system. Holly was one of the best students in her school. Everyone knew that she would have an easy time getting into college. In college, Holly's professors took note of the ambitious and purposeful student. They were confident that she would build a successful career. In the end, that's exactly what happened. Holly set herself the goal of getting an economics degree in order to make her mother proud. A good job, a good income, and an expensive car turned her into a real business lady. But things in her personal life did not go as smoothly. She met Michael a few months before deciding to take a trip to New York. The young womanizer immediately charmed the naive woman, who was a romantic since childhood. Unfortunately, Michael did not share Holly's belief in magic. In fact, he had a very consumerist attitude towards life. Having enjoyed playing with Holly's feelings, he gradually lost interest. One day, he simply suggested that they break up. The breakup felt out of the blue to Holly. Michael quickly got over their separation and turned his attention towards a new woman, whose heart he would one day break as well. Holly, on the other hand, refused to leave the house for several days. She either cried into her pillow or thought about how Michael had treated her so cruelly. Not knowing how to best help Holly, Mrs. Miller made the only right decision in such a situation. Instead of fixating on her daughter's feelings, Penelope decided to distract her in a very unusual way. The loving mother bought her daughter a ticket to New York, thereby fulfilling Holly's old dream. At first, Holly was not thrilled about the gift. At that moment, she wanted just one thing: to lock herself in her room and forget Michael. Not only did Michael break her heart, but he also made her feel like a laughingstock in the eyes of her friends and acquaintances. But Penelope was not about to give up so easily. Having insisted on the trip, she literally pulled her daughter out of the pit of depression. Of course, it would have been faster to fly, but Holly preferred to travel by train. Even though Holly had to spend a long time on the road, she really enjoyed the journey. When she finally arrived in New York, her joy knew no bounds. Seeing the Statue of Liberty with her own eyes made Holly proud of the country in which she was both born and raised. Neon signs that glistened in the store windows and the tourist-filled streets literally stunned Holly, who was seeing it all for the first time. Holly liked Central Park the most. It smoothly transformed the city from a concrete jungle to a beautiful green space. It was possible to walk around the park on foot or a rental bike. Since Holly wanted to explore every corner of the park, she decided to choose the second option. Biking along the beautiful alleys, the young woman never ceased to be amazed by everything she saw. Holly caught herself thinking that even the pain of the breakup faded into the background. At some point, the young woman was distracted by the majestic surroundings and did not even notice a young homeless man who was crossing the street right in front of her. "Hey, be careful! What are you doing? You can't just appear out of nowhere!" Holly shouted and tried avoiding hitting the man. Despite her efforts, it was impossible to avoid the collision. Soon, Holly and the homeless man were lying on the soft lawn that grew on both sides of the alleyway. The situation was so comical that the young people couldn't come up with anything to say for several minutes. young man was the first one to come to his senses. He got up, dusting off his jacket and jeans. His clothes looked so old and shabby that Holly thought that they would disintegrate at any moment. "I'm sorry, that was my bad. Indeed, I should have been more careful." The homeless man broke the silence. "It's okay. I also blame myself," Holly answered with a smile. For some unknown reason, Holly felt drawn to the man who looked like he'd fallen on hard times. "Thank you for not being angry. God knows I didn't do it on purpose. By the way, my name is Brandon," said the man, and his eyes wandered towards the bicycle still laying on the lawn. "I'm Holly. Nice to meet you." Holly smiled and extended her hand to the stranger. Brandon smiled and temporarily held Holly's tiny hand in his huge palm. Unbeknownst to themselves, the young people started talking and moved onto a bench that stood in the shade of a century-old elm tree. Holly was surprised by how well-read and well-spoken Brandon was. He spoke of things that made it obvious that he was very well-educated. At one point, Holly finally decided to ask him the question she was most curious about. "How did it happen that you ended up on the streets?" Brandon shuddered and looked deeply into Holly's eyes. She understood that he was hesitant, debating whether to tell the whole story. Finally, he mustered up the courage and began to speak. It turned out that Brandon Hughes, just like Holly, grew up in a poor family. His mother died in childbirth, and his dad raised him alone. Unfortunately, Alfred Hughes was never able to recover from the loss of his wife. He turned to alcohol in an effort to cope with all of life's challenges. At the same time, the man really loved his son, who became his meaning in life. Of course, alcoholism prevented Mr. Hughes from giving his son everything that he needed. As a result, Brandon had to mature very early. At 13, he already worked part-time at a car wash, and at 15, became an auxiliary worker at a construction site. At the same time, Brandon studied well and read a lot. At 22, his father passed away. At that time, he was still working at the construction site and thinking about college. After becoming an orphan, Brandon did not give up and was able to achieve a lot of success in his work and studies. But then, a woman came into the young man's life who made him forget about everything else in the world. Unfortunately, the relationship was not successful, and Brandon had to experience the pain of betrayal by a loved one. After that, he began to abuse alcohol more and more often, not realizing that he was involuntarily repeating the path of his father. After losing his house in a fire, Brandon quit his job and got into serious trouble. He soon found himself homeless, living on the street. When he met Holly, Brandon was making a living collecting cardboard and glass for recycling. Even though he gave up alcohol, he was still unable to return to normal life. Brandon hid nothing when telling Holly his life story, to which she listened with understanding and without judgment. "Wow, you've had such a difficult life, but you're still young and you can always start a new life." Holly spoke carefully, not wanting to offend the young man in front of her. In response to this, Brandon shrugged his shoulders and cautiously remarked, "There's no point in thinking about that now. You can't change the past. By the way, since you're new to New York, I simply have to show you around personally." "Are you asking me out on a date?" Holly asked with a smile. After her words, Brandon blushed very much and then nodded his head hesitantly. It was evident that Holly's words touched something hidden within him, and he did not take them as a joke. Since Holly intended to spend 3 days in New York, Brandon decided to become her tour guide. The young man showed her the most beautiful and exciting places in the city, which would have taken her weeks or even months to discover on her own. No matter how good of a time the two were having, they still had to part. Holly had to return home in northern Iowa, while Brandon remained in New York. When saying goodbye, the young woman left Brandon her phone number. "If you get bored or sad, call me, and I'll help you out," said Holly while handing him a folded piece of paper. "Thank you, I will definitely call you," Brandon answered in a trembling voice. The young people stood in silence for a couple of minutes. Then they hugged, exchanged friendly kisses on the cheek, and said goodbye timidly. Half an hour later, Holly was on the bus that was taking her away from New York, which really did turn out to be a city of dreams. During those 3 days, the young woman radically changed her attitude towards life, realizing that one should never despair or give up. The time spent with Brandon stirred up the most romantic feelings in her soul, leaving her with a sense of pleasant warmth and tenderness in her heart. Of course, when she returned to her hometown, Holly did not expect Brandon to call. Despite this, she kept looking at her phone, hoping that he would end up keeping his promise. A month flew by, and then another, and a third, but there was still no call. After 6 months of separation, when Holly had already come to terms with the fact that they parted ways forever, Brandon finally called. She was amazed to find out that the young man had come such a long way to see her in person. That was not the only thing that surprised the young woman, who was beside herself with happiness. Brandon's outward appearance had undergone major changes. Not only was he clean-shaven, wearing clean and tidy clothes, but he actually looked like a real model. Brandon was wearing a business suit, a shirt, and dress shoes, which indicated that he had definitely turned his life around. "Brandon, is that you?" Holly whispered in surprise, unable to believe her eyes. Just a few short months ago, her acquaintance was a homeless man, and now he looked like a professional doing very well in life. "Yes, Holly, it's me. I found a good job, and I want you to come with me," Brandon replied with a smile. At first, Holly took it as a joke, but when she looked into Brandon's eyes, she understood that he was serious. "Yes," whispered Holly while holding back tears with great difficulty. This time she was crying happy tears, overjoyed by the long-awaited meeting, instead of feeling despair over the bitterness of separation. Having made such a fateful decision, Holly knew that she was doing the right thing and never regretted it. 6 months later, they held a modest wedding, and a year later, their first baby was born. The story of Brandon and Holly once again proves that life is full of wonder and mystery. You must always remember that happiness might be waiting for you just around the corner.